Welcome back to the Terry and Jesse Show. Father Chad Ripperger, we don't want to get you short, Father, but I want to make sure you cover, after you explain what you want to cover, the permissive will of God and the active will of God. And then I also want to follow up. We have a family coming in Saturday who their house was burned down. They had their house enthroned to the Sacred Heart. You probably saw them on the internet singing praises to Our Lady. And, how can these people with tragedy deal with it so beautifully? And so I want to get that take. But finish your thoughts on what you were just explaining to us before the break.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jesse laid out a good argument for the evil that's present in Los Angeles.
Yeah, got it.
At least in that region.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just,
it's,
and I think that we only seen the tip of the iceberg, frankly, because usually this stuff is occult, it's hidden.
Yeah.
But I was going to just mention, sometimes too today, people, you hear even bishops saying this. Oh, God doesn't punish people like that, and that's just what's done in the Old Testament. That's actually not true. So if you look at some of the natural disasters that have happened in the last, say, 20 to 30 years, some of them can just be natural disasters that just happen naturally, but some of them are pretty obvious that God had enough. Yeah. For example, New Orleans has the highest rate of voodoo in the United States. It got wiped out by Katrina. In Thailand, where the tsunami happened, most people are unaware of the fact that the tsunami actually occurred in a place that was known as the epicenter for international pedophilia. When the Red Cross went in, they were stunned to find only men and boys in that area. There were no women.
Yeah.
And so this was an indicator that, okay, God had enough.
Yeah.
And if you ever want, or even Assisi, even in Italy, they put Buddha on the top of the tabernacle, and then that year it destroyed that church, but from an earthquake. But the best one that is so obvious is the distinction between Haiti and the Dominican Republic.
Oh, there you go.
Dominican Republic, the president consecrated the Dominican Republic to the Sacred Heart. They're on the same island. Haiti consecrated actually to pagan deities, and Haiti is consistently destroyed and hammered by earthquakes and all sorts of stuff, whereas the Dominican Republic just isn't affected. So it's a pretty clear indicator. So that all being said, let me just put it this way. You can't help but stand back and look at what's happening in Los Angeles and think to yourself, this looks like God is punishing them for their behavior. I don't think that they're necessarily going to change, but at least he's, acting consistently with the way he's always done in the past, where when there reaches a kind of an apex of sin, that's it. He pulls the plug.
Got it.
I want to ask you a question. We know that the Bible, our Lord Jesus Christ in Matthew chapter 5, he says, it rains on the good and the bad. It rains on the just and the unjust. So, bad things are going to happen to good people, like the family Terry's talking about.
It'll help them, sure.
But their attitude, the fact that because of their Catholic faith, it's deeply in their soul. When they came back and saw their house decimated, they started singing Marian hymns in Latin. Because they realize that life is transitory, and they realize that what's most important is what they have is their Catholic faith. But I also think this is spiritual, because we also know of another person. I'm not going to mention his name. We all know who he is. Mm-hmm. Right before, when the fires were raging in his neighborhood, he did the Epiphany blessing, and then he chalked his doors and sprinkled his house with Epiphany water, and then he was evacuated by the fire department with him and his family. Well, this friend of all of ours, our mutual friend, he comes back a couple of hours later, and every house in his neighborhood is burned to the ground, except his. And so again, so God honored his prayer, his patriarchal prayer, directly intervened. That's God's direct will, based on the fact that he has an authority over his house and his family. He prayed in faith, the Epiphany blessing, and his house was spared. So to me, that shows that there is a spiritual component to these LA fires, because everybody else's house in the neighborhood was burned to the ground, except for his neighbor on the right. And I asked him, I said, was your neighbor on the right, are they practicing Catholics? He goes, no. He goes, they're Catholics. They're kind of lukewarm Catholics. I told our friend, I said, well, maybe your Epiphany blessing prayers were powerful enough to cover their property as well. He just laughed. What do you say, Father?
Yeah, no, I actually, it's especially if you see the pictures, because he sent me the pictures around his house. There was just absolute devastation.
Yeah.
There's no way to account for the fact that his house just didn't go up in flames.
Yeah.
So, but other than that, other than the fact that I think God specifically spared, and God can actually specifically spare, there's actually a ritual called the ritual against storms and tempests. And the same thing actually applies even to natural disasters. And this is actually one of the things I'm working on a book called The Power of a Bishop. If the bishops pray against that stuff in their territory, they can actually divert that stuff and keep it from happening.
Wow.
But a lot of them just don't even believe it. A lot of them just ignore it and don't act like it actually happens. But I think that, what that's a sign of, though, is that God will, as you said, Jesse, I think the wording was perfect. God will honor our prayers if we actually pray. If they pray, then they'll be saved. If they won't, well, then they won't necessarily.
Wow.
I talked to Kyle, and he told me that obviously, he says demons are territorial. Yeah. So he said that there are locations, like some of the places that I named to you, right, in the first segment, in California, where they can be infested with demons as a result of the rituals that have taken place there. I mean, we know that there's holy places in the world, like Lourdes, Fatima, Tepeyac, the Holy House of Loreto. So we know that there are holy places in the world, but we also know that there are evil places in the world. And I named them in the first segment of the show. So my question is, demons infest certain places based on the sinfulness of the people there, the rituals, the hexes, the curses, and all these diabolical activity that's going on there. And so, to me, that location that's being burned, none of my family live. People are asking me, Jesse, is your family okay? I said, none of my family lives in Pacific Palisades or Altadena, Pasadena. My family lives in the barrio. They live in the slums, okay? So their little houses are safe. A lot of people that are Hollywood directors, producers, the rich and famous, the earth movers, the woke, elite, those are the ones that have suffered a lot of damage. But again, a lot of good people as well, like Mel Gibson. He's a person that's a man of goodwill. He also lost everything that he had. So my question to you, isn't it true, Father, that here on planet Earth, I mean, just like there are places that have like a spiritual patina, Loreto, Fatima, Tepeyac, there's also places that have kind of a diabolical patina because of so much evil. Am I onto something?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's different levels of it, in fact. So demons love location. They love possessing locations or infesting locations because of the fact that they can exercise a certain amount of influence in those locations and over the people in those locations. And there's varying degrees of that. Like, so the pinnacle of their influence in a location is called a portal, and it's a ritual that has done. You have to be highly proficient to pull it off. I've only seen a couple of them actually done, but from there, it's the inversion of a Catholic church, the consecrated Catholic Church. It's from where the graces flow into a region. So, but those are the ones that have the most influence. Then there, of course, the demons can actually infest or possess houses, locations. We talk about regional spirits, where there's specific regional spirits over regions, where they influence certain kinds of spirits, will influence certain kinds of things. So the general principle is, as you mentioned, is that the type of sin that people commit opens the door to specifically to that kind of demon or diabolic influence. And if you have a group of people doing a lot of sinful things or very similar simple things, it's going to empower the demon and demons that get involved that very much in that location.
Father Chad, quick question. A couple of people have noted that the church that burnt down up in the Southern California, the tabernacle, and the sacred host, our Lord, was undamaged. The stained glass windows for the Stations of the Cross, with the church being burned down totally, didn't break, or they're in mint condition. What is that? The prayers of the faithful at that church that were praying for protection, or how does this happen? Because it seems like we hear about other things that where even the atomic bomb in Fatima, where the Jesuit priests were living the Fatima message and they didn't get harmed. Is this just the prayers of good people asking for protection?
It can be, yes. Like as you mentioned in in Fatima, etc.
Yeah.
There's also, you see some of that, if I remember right, where they dropped the bomb in Hiroshima.
Yes.
There was some
The Jesuits.
That were protected in that same kind of a fashion.
Right.
So the answer is, yeah, it does. God does answer the prayers. Sometimes God will also preserve certain sacred things. So like, I'm sure you've seen places where it burns down or there's a bombing and the only thing left standing is a statue of Our Lady.
Many times.
Yeah.
I love it.
So I don't think that's a coincidence.
Yeah.
And I think that those are indicators that God does preserve those things. And I think there was another place there. Wasn't there another Catholic church there in Los Angeles that was preserved from all the burnout too? So I do think that it actually does. God does actually work in that way.
Interesting. Jesse?
Father, I was talking to a good Catholic bishop. I'm not going to mention his name because he's retired now, but the Temple of Satan was coming over to his diocese, and they were going to have a 3-day satanic conference. And I met with the bishop, and I asked him, I said, Bishop, why don't you come out there and pray chapter 3 at this conference? Bring the Blessed Sacrament out there. I'll have a bunch of cops around you. You'll be surrounded by a bunch of men. And why don't you pray and disrupt this conference with the power of chapter 3? And I told him, because I was reading Pope Leo XIII, he said, if a Catholic bishop goes out in public and prays chapter 3 over a place, location, or locality, he says he will blow out all the demons in that area. This is written by Pope Leo XIII. I showed it to this bishop, and he's one of the good bishops, by the way. He's retired now. And he looked at me, goes, Jesse, I've never read that before. Can you give it to me? So I made a copy of it and gave it to him from Pope Leo XIII's writings. But the fact is, even good bishops, Father Ripperger, don't know the power that they can wield with their prayers.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. By the way, send me that citation too, because that fits one of the things that I'm going to be talking about in this book that's coming up in relationship to the power of a bishop. There's two different sides to the power of a bishop. The first is that he determines the liturgical life, the devotional life, the various practices and things that actually go on in the church, both liturgical and paraliturgical. He determines, how the sacraments are administered in certain respects, and there's all sorts of things. As a result, this is the guy that in that particular location has his hand on the spigot of grace. He's the guy that can turn it on or turn it off. So what he does is going to determine the graces that flow into his parish, into his diocese.
I'd like to ask more questions on that book of yours, because remember, Monsignor George Kelly wrote a book, Battle for the American Church. And what did he say in that book? Where's the church going? Where its leaders take them. I'd like to ask you, Father Chad, more about your new book coming up on the power of bishops. Stay with us, family. We'll be back after a quick break here on the Terry and Jesse Show. Welcome back to the Terry and Jesse Show. Father Chad Ripperger talking about the power of the bishop. That's why we need to be praying for our bishops. Speaking about bishops, I just want to endorse this. Bishop Joseph Strickland will be at our Spiritual Warfare Conference again, April 11th and 12th, along with Father Joshua Stengel, who's a priest with Father Chad Ripperger, and exorcist. We've got Kyle Clement, Jess Romero, Dr. Louis Sandoval, and Dr. Dan Schneider. This is going to be a big event. I want people to go to vmpr.org to sign up for that, because there's plenty of room at this time. Father Chad, tell us a little bit about Father Joshua, who you're the one who sent us him, because we said we need to have an exorcist. And can you tell us, our listeners, a little bit about Father Joshua?
Yeah, actually, he's a priest of our society. He's he does exorcism work. He takes different kinds of cases than I do, just so we can kind of divide up the caseload.
Yeah.
And so he's also pretty knowledgeable, very intelligent.
Yeah.
He's also got advanced degrees in scripture, but he's actually not a heretic, which is
that's good. A miracle. I'm sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and he understands what the problems are with the modern scriptural studies and all that things. So he's a solid character. He's very balanced and got a good, clear head on his shoulders. Well,
we're looking forward to having him at the Spiritual Warfare Conference, April 11th and 12th. People, go ahead and sign up by going to vmpr.org. Father Chad, when I heard you talk about your book, it reminds me of what Bishop Strickland did at Dodger Stadium for a sacrilegious event that they were doing with the these so-called nuns that weren't nuns. And then I think of what Bishop Strickland did when we had COVID. He went up on top of a hill. We have it on our YouTube channel where he blessed all four corners of the Diocese of Los Angeles. And I want to ask you again.
That was Bishop David O'Connell.
Oh, that was Bishop O'Connell.
Bishop O'Connell.
Bishop Strickland did it the following year.
Oh, okay.
And I any bishop, I'm always encouraging the bishops to come up and give blessings because Father Chad, I'm more curious about your book because I want to encourage our listeners to really be praying and making reparation, not just reparation, but atonement, because so many of our bishops, and believe me, I live in Los Angeles. In my entire lifetime, if I told you all the bishops who died living lives that were contrary to the gospel, and I mean way out there, like they had AIDS because of things they did, that were immoral. I've seen it all my life. And I'm thinking, how is it? Well, is it because we're not praying enough for them? Or is it because they just haven't been catechized to understand their role as a bishop to teach, govern, and sanctify? What is it?
Yes. It's all of the above. So one of the things that people have to remember is that we get the leaders that we actually deserve. As you were talking, it reminds me of the fact that one of the signs that we're getting the leaders we deserved is, in addition to the bishops kind of turning off the spigot of grace, where they're shutting down masses in different locations and all of this stuff. But the other side of it is that on the spiritual warfare side of it, the bishops do practically nothing. They could actually be out there. So, for example, let me just give you an example.
Please.
Bishop started doing chapter 3 over his diocese every single day to drive out the demons in that region because he has authority over it, especially those involved in making that are influencing those who are making political decisions. The impact that would have in that location would be tremendous, but the bishops do nothing. I think that most bishops, so to get to your second point, I don't think most bishops even have a clue about the spiritual power that their office wields. I don't think they have it. And I'm not just saying that because I think they tend to think too much in terms of canonically rather than spiritually and what they actually have. And I think that's the thing that's set. So, but I think a lot of times they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing because Catholics aren't deserving of it. They're not leading good lives.
Wow.
Sir, yes. I just sent you that information on the power of a bishop's prayer, so it's in your email. Terry, it's in your email too.
Thank you. I want to give it to Bishop Strickland.
I sent it to Bishop Strickland as well. Look what it says. I'll read it to you. This is on part 3, 1614, Rite of Exorcism, Pope Leo the 13th, Weller's Ritual, commentary, page 223. He says this. This is Weller's edition. Father Weller. He says, whereas the preceding rite of exorcism, chapter 3, is designated for a particular person, the form given here is meant especially to be employed to expel the devil's sway over a locality, parish, or city. Close quote. That's page 223 of Weller's commentary on chapter 3. So I sent it to all three.
I got it. I'm reading it. Wow.
Yeah. Father, let me ask you a question. Do you agree that with another priest that said, Father Real, who said, this is the most evil generation since the flood of Noah?
Well, definitely since the flood of Noah. Whether it's the one of all time, I would say I'm not so sure when you listen to some of the stuff that went on in the Old Testament. On the other hand, I would be inclined to probably agree with him for this one reason. In Sodom and Gomorrah, where they were wiped out by God, at least they weren't trying to marry each other.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing is and so I think that some of the stuff that we're doing today, it's extraordinarily disordered and it's evil, but it makes it even more evil that it's post-Christian. We know better. Historically, we knew that this stuff was bad, that this is how God was going to punish us if we did it, and yet people keep doing it. And that's why that openly mocking God was pretty because it wasn't even that they disbelieved in God, it's they were mocking him. And so I think that's so. Given that all being said, I think given the types of depravity and the ubiquitousness of it, plus, like, for example, just the fact that 35% of at any one given time of what goes through the internet is pornography, I just don't see how God doesn't see us as an evil generation. I actually started a conference. This was a little while ago with that particular observation, that we like to think that we're actually a pretty good, country or a society. But I said, think about this. We have 60 million abortions in this country. Now, we're not just talking about 60 million murders. We're talking about the fact that, let's just say, 2/3 of those women voluntarily did that abortion. That means 2/3 of the women in this country are murderers. And we're not thinking about that. And don't get me wrong, I have compassion for women who went through all that. But that's not the issue. The issue is we have they're murderers. We've got sodomites. We've got fornicators. We've got all this stuff. You go down the litany. That's what we are a nation of. And why do people honestly believe that God wouldn't say that's enough at some point?
I just have to say this. Our Lady of Fatima said back in 1917, more souls are going to hell because of sins of the flesh. If that was done in 1917, before the sexual revolution, I'm thinking, whoa, we's in trouble.
Think about it. What La Salette was 1832, I think.
Yep.
Yeah. She said the clergy have become cesspools of impurity. 1832.
Amazing.
So what the difficulty we have, and the problem with modernism is it just exacerbated it, because it basically took away any inhibitions in relationship to the moral code, because you became your own standard of truth.
Yeah. Father, I don't want to get you in trouble. I really don't. But what crossed my mind is the liturgy. The way you worship is the way you believe. And I still think that, and this is my position, I know I'm getting into trouble, but that's not the first time. If we read the Second Vatican Council document on the liturgy, they would turn in their graves if they saw what happened after the council and how it was implemented, like ad orientem. They assumed that the priest wasn't going to be facing the people. And all these changes, I'm just asking this, and this is just my take, has that affected the faith? Because when we think about maybe 17% of the people, like in Philadelphia, the bishop acknowledges, are only going to church on Sunday. This is all across our country. I know we're only 6% of the Catholic Church, but the fact is, people are not going to church. Has the liturgy played a role in that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think so. I mean, part of it is too is that the liturgy is especially the Mass, is the primary means by which grace comes into the world.
Yes.
So the fact that we change it and then we wonder why the world goes to pot, well, this isn't rocket science.
Exactly.
But that all being said, and then of course you say that and people say, "Oh, you think the new Mass is evil?"
No.
Look, just listen to what I just said, not extrapolate. But all that being said, in Pius, to give you an idea of how things have changed. I have been talking openly about the fact that there were certain times in which there were distinctive retractions of God's grace in the history of the world, and you can see them.
Wow.
So, for example, the fact that in the 1960s there was a retraction of grace, and then you just saw this proliferation of stuff actually happening. But there was another retraction of grace that was very key, that is very subtle, but it was very damaging. To give you an idea of how this shift happened, Pius XI was asked to insert St. Joseph into the canon. Mm-hmm. Up until that point, the attitude of the popes and the church in general was that the Mass, the liturgy of the Mass, was so absolutely sacrosanct that only such minor modifications could be made by popes over the course of time. When he was asked to make that one change to the canon of the Mass, he said, "I can't do that. I'm only the Pope."
Oh my gosh.
From that time, so there was a retraction of grace after Pius XI, but there was a retraction of grace that happened that resulted in this attitude in the 40s and 50s that we can just start making changes to the liturgy and we can just do whatever we want in relationship. That was a sign of a retraction of grace, because the piety regarding the forefathers and the history of the liturgy was gone by that point. That retraction of grace in the 40s and 50s also coincided with the infiltration of not just the Freemasons and the communists and all that. It was also the time in which the homosexuals infiltrated the seminaries and got in there. So that was a distinctive time in which God was retracting the grace in relationship to the church. And so I think that push for all the liturgical changes just precipitated yet another retraction of grace, because prayer begets what it signifies. what you ask for is what you're going to get. If you stop asking for stuff, so if you look at the new Mass, they stripped a lot of the stuff out of the canons. They stripped a lot of the stuff out of the prayers, the propers. They stripped all this stuff out of it, and then they wonder. I'll give you a perfect example.
Tell me.
They used to in the old rites before Bugnini got his paws on it in the 40s.
Hang on a second. That's a good teaser. I want to hear this one. Okay. We got a break. I got the bumper music. Father Chad Ripperger, I'm on the edge of my chair. You were going to tell us something, and we got interrupted with the break. I'm all ears. I love it.
You're going to have to remind
me.
All right,
you were talking about the liturgy. Go ahead,
you talked about Bugnini and receiving hands in the paws.
Yeah.
The liturgical changes.
Yeah.
You'll have to forgive me. I've been lecturing. I'm training exorcists right now.
Oh, so God love you.
6 hours a day, so I'm a little rummy.
Yeah, no.
So, but anyway, okay.
Yeah.
So before Bugnini made the changes to the liturgy before 1940s, every single day during Lent, there was a collect in which we would pray for the Holy Father every single day at Mass. He removed that. We stopped praying for the guy, and then we wonder why he's acting so strange. It's there. This is, again, it's not rocket science. What you pray for is what you're going to get. You stop praying for it, you're likely not going to get it. And I think that people have this attitude: "Oh, God will just take care of everything." Well, no, he chose to act through what they call secondary causes, that is, instruments to beget this stuff. And this is the problem with the bishops is that if they knew the power that they had and could do those things that would actually, on a spiritual level, I think they would see drastic shifts in their particular dioceses.
Wow. Fantastic. Jess?
Yeah, Father, I'm going to go back to, again, the disasters in Los Angeles. And I'll tell you why I think there's a supernatural component and there's a divine component to it. I would say, first of all, St. Paul talks about this in Romans chapter 8. In several verses, he talks about all creation is groaning in labor pains even until now. So he talks about the fact that, earth is waiting to give birth to the sons and daughters of God, and that the earth is in labor pains. And then I couple that verse with Genesis 3:17, where God tells Eve, cursed is the ground, he tells a snake, cursed is the ground because of you, in toil you shall eat its yield all the days of your life. So again, Genesis 3:17 talks about Adam's sin, the fact that it had catastrophic consequences for the whole world. God says, curse the ground because of you. So you look at that, Genesis 3:17, Romans chapter 8, the earth is going through labor pains, just like, mankind, because of the fall, we're also going through our own personal labor pains. Our bodies are going to deteriorate, decay, and die. And then finally, and I want you to tell me if I'm tracking in the right direction, St. Augustine, I was looking at the City of God last night for the show, and in chapter 1 and chapter 9, he says this. He says that man is judged and punished for his sins individually in the afterlife. However, since nations have no afterlife, the collective sins of nations are punished on earth.
Wow.
Yeah.
So coupling the earth has been cursed in Genesis 3:17. The earth is still suffering, going through labor pains right now because the earth is going to be renewed in Revelation 19, 20, and 21, a new heaven and a new earth. And St. Augustine talks about the fact that, that the sins of a nation can reach such a climax that it demands God's justice. Am I onto something?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, historically, that's how it was always understood. The problem is since Vatican II, not necessarily as a result of Vatican II, but since Vatican II, what we're seeing is that there's just this systematic denial. Now, if you pay close attention to the guys, the purveyors of that idea that God doesn't punish people anymore for these kinds of things, you start finding out that as theologians, they had issues with the Sixth Commandment, or they had other serious moral or spiritual issues. And as a result, that's why they were proposing these particular changes in how God behaves and things of that sort. So I think that they fail to understand that God doesn't change. And so the only thing that's going to change is human beings over the course of time. And then by that, I mean in the sense of our human nature doesn't change, etc. But we can become more evil as a nation. And as a result, God punishes us. But part of it also has to do with, I think, a failure to understand that, God does chastise us, but his ultimate goal is to convert us.
Yes.
The reason he wipes out an entire place like Sodom and Gomorrah is so that the rest of us know, okay, you better not go down that road. And it's the same thing with this, that sometimes God punishes us to correct us, or to be a sign to others, hey, this isn't, I'm not going to tolerate this.
It makes sense to me. Wow.
See, another question, because you used a word that made me laugh. Years ago, I read the transcript of The Exorcism of Annalise Michel, which is the movie Emily Rose, The Exorcism of Emily Rose. And you can read the German transcript has been translated into English, so you can read it. It's online. I read it years ago. And it was funny, but I did read there that the demons told the priest during the solemn session, as the priest was asking questions, the demons said, yeah, we got the Dutch bishops or the Belgian bishops to start teaching people to receive in the pause.
Yep,
so when the demons talked to the priest in solemn session, they didn't say the hands. They said the pause. Yep. So when you said that, I started laughing, because I've actually read that on a transcript from a demon that told that to an exorcist. We taught the Dutch bishops to teach the people to receive in the pause. My question is, have you ever heard that term in a solemn session?
No, I haven't heard that.
Okay.
I have had access to certain aspects of the Exorcism of Annalise Michel. The full containment of the files is actually still under lock and key, because the German bishops don't want it to get out. Part of it has to do with the fact that during the sessions, the demons were naming names about who was bad in Germany at the time. But the other part of it was, too, is they were going down all the liturgical changes. Oh, yeah, we're glad you got rid of the asparagus because it used to drive the demons out of the people.
I bet.
We're glad you got rid of the bells because it used to drive the demons out of the church.
Yep.
We're glad you got rid of it. And they were just going down all these changes.
Sure.
Wow.
It reminds me of there's a 17th century exorcism of a bishop in France they were the Huguenots tried to exorcise this girl, and they just got taken to the woodshed. So at a certain point, the bishop steps in, and the bishop does the exorcism, and it becomes a majorly known event in the area that this bishop did this unbelievable exorcism. There was all these preternatural things that were going on, etc. And at a certain point, the bishop says to the demons, "Why didn't you respond to the prayers of the Huguenots?" And they started laughing, and they said, "That's because we came up with them."
What a great answer.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where it's the liturgy does play a key role. I think it would be naive to think that the demons don't try and influence the development of the liturgy in various ways. I'm not necessarily passing judgment on anything, but I'm just saying, and this is actually one of the reasons why in the past the church was very careful and guarded about making the liturgical changes. Which is, again, the book Papal Limits Over the Authority, I talk about what they can and cannot do.
Yeah.
But even in the context of that, I also talk about prudentially what they should and shouldn't be doing as well.
Yeah. And finally, Father, go ahead, Jess. Go ahead.
Yeah. The other side, the enemies of God know the power of liturgy. Isn't
Absolutely.
that the reason why Satanists, witches, occultists, everything they do, it's a mockery of the Catholic Church. They do it liturgically. They have feast days, and they do rituals.
All reversed. Yeah.
Correct.
It's not only that it's inverted, which is absolutely the case, which is and in that sense, it's a mockery. The other side of it is, though, too, is which tells you that they know that that's where the power ultimately is.
Yeah.
But that's also why they work so hard to keep reducing the sacrificial element. They keep trying to reduce where the liturgy is done. They keep trying to reduce those who practice, because if they could get to the point where they could basically remove the holy sacrifice of the Mass from the face of the earth, even for a short period of time, they know spiritually it would give them so much power in the nature of in the world, basically.
Father Chad, I have a friend who's just became an exorcist down in Mexico, Father Charles Carpenter. He thinks the world of you. I know that. And he wrote a letter to me saying about the devil has these 5 main weapons: temptation, vexation, infestation, obsession, and possession. He says, nevertheless, Only one of these weapons occupied 99% of his activity, temptation. His main aim is to get people to live comfortably in the state of mortal sin. Would you agree with that?
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
That's the goal. I mean, their ultimate goal is to get someone in the state of mortal sin and then have them commit, or just even commit suicide knowingly.
Yeah.
But they have them die in the state of mortal sin. That's the goal, because then they don't make it to heaven.
Yeah. Well, that made sense. When I read his letter, I said, that's it. You know, that's why at the end of every show, what does Jesse and I ask? Jess, what state should we be living in, brother?
Greatest sanctifying grace.
You got
Don't live
it.
in a state of mortal
Father
sin.
Chad, for those who want to support your ministry, how can people support you in building? I know you're building a monastery. You got different things, needs. How can people financially support you?
Well, if they just go to lawrence.org, there's a couple of different ways that they can support us. They can either help us with our general needs, or they can actually help us. Right now, we've got all the money for the chapel that we're building, and the addition. What we need, though, is money for the high altar. So if people want to donate to that, they can go there and do that.
Can you spell it for those of us who can't spell that?
Oh, yeah. So it's DOLORANS.org.
Got it. Father Chad Ripperger, we thank you for your time and educating us in the faith. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart, because the prayers that I'm reading for my spiritual warfare prayers for a long time, every morning I say those prayers for not just my family, but for the church. And I know many of our listeners are doing that. And I know Jesse and I both appreciate your perseverance and your consistency and not doing anything extraordinary other than you keep repeating the fundamentals on the spiritual life. And I thank you for doing that.
Oh, you're very welcome. Yeah, keep me in my prayers. That's from the time in which I was ordained. My goal was simply to bring the tradition to the current state, and but then also to basically tell people what the saints say. I don't need to come up with anything new.
No.
Just tell them what the saints say.
Well said.
Give us your priestly blessing.
Amen.
Sure. Benedictio Dei omnipotentis, Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, super vos et semper. Amen.